Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story. Alright, welcome to Friday. I don't know if any of you or many of you know that this year the USA turns 250 years old. It's going to be a big thing. At least it seems to be a big thing in our area. I know Mount Rushmore is going to be swamped. We've already seen postings for events. We're already looking at ideas of how to decide what we're going to do. And this is connected to that semi. It's a tiny bit connected to it. Today's video is a celebration of Lead. Now, Lead is what I call a town on a hill. Or maybe many hills. Literally. It should be Hill City instead of, Lead, but it's called Lead. So, whatever. We visited there. I've had family there. I pretty much spent every summer there. From the time I was little until I was a teenager in Lead, Deadwood, in Central City. So I know the area pretty well. And so the celebration was good. It was also a celebration of the Homestake mine. My brain went blank there for a minute. The Homestake mine is now the open cut, which is technically closed, although you can still go put golf balls into it, and it is being used for a study, science labby thing. But the homestead is where my mom's dad, my grandpa, my mom's dad, worked. He was a miner. I don't know exactly what he did in the mine. I only know that he worked there. Hoping with my ancestry information, I will be able to find out more about that era of his life. Because I did not know him very well. He died when I was like 8 or 9. I barely remember him. Only thing I remember about him is he had one of those coin pouches that you squeeze and it opens up a slit, and you'd give us quarters out of that. And it was yellow. So yeah, that's what I can remember there. I've chosen pirates for this race because it's mostly about gold and mining. So I'll get to be pirates and find some gold. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. Maybe. There we go. All right. There's Lucia. There's Barry. There's Elise. There's Trip. There's Gia Girl. There's Light. There's Leon. Light and Love, or Love and Life. There's Aisha. There's Fine. Capine. Tay Eats. Josie. Betty. Optibob. Belle. Marketplace. Nut Podcast. Moon. Rushmore. Sheena. Waving your little swords there. Don't poke anybody. There's Mayhem. And there's Adventure. Treasure. Josie. M and J. Popcorn. Oh, it's M and J. Hold on. Alright, this is M and J Metal. Metal detecting. Shorts and switch games. So we've got some food and soda. We've got some gaming shorts. And, well, it's not recently. Usually I catch these random videos here. This is why I said it was a vlog. Mostly because it's more of a vloggy thing. Reviews, cards, samples, things like that. Very long videos, not a very active channel, but still, there he is. Check him out. Like, share, comment. Have a good day.
Tonight, on behalf of the community of Lead, thank you all for being here to celebrate something that, just by the numbers of people that are gathered, something that is really quite extraordinary. The beginning of Lead's 150th anniversary celebration. In 1876, this really quite remarkable community was founded. And now, in 2026, we mark 150 years of history and of resilience and of community. Tonight is especially meaningful because it's the very first event kicking off this once-in-a-generation milestone. And we gather on a date that holds deep significance. April 9th. It was on this day that gold was discovered at Homestake. That discovery didn't just change the course of history. In many ways, it created it. It is the reason Homestake came into existence. It is the reason the city of Lead was born. And it is the foundation upon which generations of families have built their lives and their livelihoods and their legacies over these last 150 years. So tonight we celebrate legacy. We celebrate the people. We celebrate the miners and the families and the neighbors, those who shaped this community. We honor the cultures and the traditions and the shared experiences that have defined Lead through times of prosperity and challenge alike. Through every rise and fall, this community has endured with strength and with resilience. This evening we are honored to hear from three special guest speakers who will share stories from Homestake's past. Stories that remind us of where we came from. Stories that remind us of why it matters. We will finish the presentation with a celebratory toast and a piece of cake. Amen. Following the program, we invite you to continue this experience with a second guided tour of the Homestake Opera House. So if you were not able to participate in the first tour, we want to offer that to you a second time this evening. But most importantly, tonight really is about remembrance and learning and celebration. As time passes, we risk losing the stories. We risk losing the voices of those who have come before us. And so this gathering is more than just an event. This is preservation of our history. This is our attempt to begin to pass it forward and to keep the spirit of our community alive for the generations that would come after us. So I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for being a part of this story. And I want to thank you for helping us honor the legacy of Homestake and the enduring heart of Lead, South Dakota. And so with that, let us begin. We are blessed to have three speakers with us tonight. I'm not one of them. But we are blessed to have three speakers here tonight. The first being David Wolf. David is Professor Emeritus from Black Hills State University, where he taught Black Hills and South Dakota history. He has had a lifelong interest in mining history and has received the Rodman Paul Award for outstanding contributions to mining history from the Mining History Association and the Robinson Memorial Award, the state's highest history honor from the South Dakota State Historical Society. This evening, Dr. Wolf will give a brief overview of the Homestake Mine's story past. And so with that, I would like you to welcome David Wolf.
Thank you, Todd, and welcome to everyone. It's a distinct honor to kick off this event. Hopefully I can do it justice. Before I begin with the formal talk, I want to thank several people who made this possible. Robin and Sarah, we talked about this possibility, and she ran with the idea, and it's great. Thank you so much, Robin. Todd Jones for hosting us here at the Opera House. Thank you so much. And the many fine businesses that have sponsored this event, Lynn's Dakota Mart, Dakota Gold, Roundhouse Liquors, Berry Gold, we thank them all, and all the wonderful volunteers. And thanks to the people that will follow me, Ann and Jerry. To help commemorate this event, I had a poster produced. It's about 11 by 17, and it's commemorating the Homestake discovery, April 9th, 1876, April 9th, 2026. I had a number of them printed. What it shows, one of these photo pairs that Paul Horsted does, a photo pair that's coming out in his upcoming book, South Dakota Yesterday and Today. We're handing these out at no charge or free. There's a limited number, so one per family. I should say my wife will be handing them out. She'll be back by the front doors at the end of the event tonight, and maybe she'll have her daughter-in-law there to help, or her son to help as well. But feel free to get a poster as long as they last. Thank you very much. I am an historian. I'm not a miner by trade, and several excellent mining histories helped inform this. I just want to mention a couple. Stephen Mitchell's wonderful books. You're probably aware of those. Nuggets to Neutrinos, The Homestake Story. Riches of Our Universe, The Homestake Legacy, the Sanford Underground Research Facility, are two excellent books. Other excellent books are Dwayne Smith's Staking Claim and History, The Evolution of Mining Company, and William Bronson and T.H. Watkins' Homestake and Centennial History. But I guess the book that got me really interested in the Homestake years ago was Mildred Fielder's classic Homestake Gold, written in 1970. I read that in 1971, and I became fascinated with mining history soon after. I don't think it's a coincidence. But today I'm going to talk about what made the Homestake a success from my own biased opinion. I'm going to talk about a few people, innovations, and events. I'm going to have 20, 25 minutes. I might go a little bit longer. So I'm just going to touch on a few highlights. If I miss something you think is important, I apologize. If someone you think is important, I apologize. But of course, you can't do a talk about the Homestake discovery without talking about the Manuel brothers. What started the Homestake success is finding the right prospectors that could identify the gold vein, and Manuel brothers seemed to be those men. They had a large history in mining and prospecting throughout the West, circulating the West before they came to this part of the world. They arrived in Custer in late 1875, worked French Creek, found the results disappointing, moved north, arrived on Whitewood Creek, February 1876. By then, the placer rush was well underway. Like any good hard rock prospectors, they knew that gold came from someplace. It just didn't magically appear in the creek. So they started looking for the likely locations for where that placer gold came from. And they started looking at the various gulches, looking at the hillsides. And they identified Bobtail Gulch, kind of opposite where Central City is today, as a likely location. Went up Bobtail Gulch, staked the Golden Terror claim, had some gold. They weren't satisfied and they kept looking. And this was early April 1876. They went on the hill above Bobtail Gulch, between Central City and Lee today. And the snow was deep, unlike this year. And some of the members got discouraged. They said, we're going back to camp and wait. Moses said, I'm going to continue to look. And he looked down, kept looking at the ground, and on April 9th, or April 8th, April 8th, the snow was melting and water was running down little rivulets, and he saw a little bit of quartz shining down below. He pried up a piece of it, looked at it, looked promising, and took it to camp. In camp, they smashed it, panned it, and what did they see when they panned it out? A little string of gold at the bottom. As all good prospectors, they jumped up and said, Eureka, Eureka! And you don't know what Eureka really means, but they think it means excitement for gold. But nevertheless. Well, the next morning they went back, Moses, Manuel, Hank Hardy, and they picked out the best spot they think that gold came from, and they staked the Homestake claim on April 9, 1876. This was discovery. This was the start of the claim. The claim, as you can see, is about 454 feet by 1338, and they started the discovery shaft in the middle of that claim. Now the Homestake, that's what they named it. Why the Homestake? Well, in the parlance of prospector language, a homestake is a claim rich enough to send a man home in style. Now, the question is, did the Manuels come up with that on their own? Or were they copying it from someplace else? That's, we don't know. But there were other homestakes in the West at this time. In fact, Lake County, Colorado had a homestake mine staked in 1871. Important to the homestake success was the ore they found. And here's an ore sample that my friend Don Delicate gave me probably back in 1971. And it shows him looked at some fool's gold in it, but there's also some gold in there. A little bit of high grade from the homestake. They found 3 million gold ore, where the gold is loosely held by the rock, where you can crush the gold, crush the ore, and the gold can be released, and you amalgamate the crushed material, and the mercury in the amalgamation tables will adhere to the gold, and you can recover gold in that way. 3 million gold ore was pretty unique to the homestake in this part of the world. All the other mines around the Denver League area were refractory, very difficult ore to treat. How rich was this gold? Now, Moses Manuel said they dug in a 200-pound piece of a chunk of initially. It was very rich, half ounce per ton. But as the mine got deeper and deeper, the mine wasn't quite as valuable. The ore wasn't quite as valuable. And it became kind of a low-grade deposit. But hence, that leads to the great homestake toast that many mine managers said over the years. Here's to low-grade ore and plenty of it. To make a mine like this work, you need money, you need capital, you need someone with energy to push it. And that person was George Hurst. Now the Manuels only did enough work on their claim to make sure that they could prove its wealth. And by golly, George Hurst was a mining man who was interested in acquiring more wealth. He had made some money on the Wolfram mine in the Comstock Lode, the Ontario mine in Park City, Utah. And while he was in Park City, in early 1877, he saw a sample of the homestake ore. He sent L.D. Kellogg to the homestake to look at the vein, and Kellogg was impressed. And he put down a bond price of around $70,000. You do see other prices out there, but that's the price most people go with. And he let Hurst know what he had done. Hurst was encouraged. He came out in October 1877 with mining expert Henry Janning, and they said, by golly, or probably something similar to that this is good. They verified the riches, and they immediately predicted that the vein is much larger than the one homestake claim that they looked at. As we all know, Hurst did not work alone. He was part of an investment triumvirate. Lloyd Tevis was a partner, President of Wells Fargo, James B. Hagan, a land speculator from California. Those three invested the homestake, with Hurst being the primary owner. And they incorporated the homestake on November 5th, 1877, put it on the San Francisco Stock Exchange, and then in January 1879, they listed it on the New York Stock Exchange, the first mining company to be listed on the stock exchange. In the first years of the homestake mine, Hurst was the manager. He made the decisions. He stayed here until August 1879, with taking some time out to go to California. But his strength was also appointing good men to follow him along the way. And the superintendent that followed him was Samuel McMaster. McMaster only worked for 6 years, but he did carry out Hearst's wishes, and he did fulfill the promise of making the homestake great. And McMaster then was followed by Thomas Greer. A man people in Leach know well, since his statue stands in front of Christ Church, but he served as mine manager from 1884 to 1914. He had a capacity for hard work and eye for detail, and he made many consequential changes in his years, and we'll talk about several of those changes in this talk. And Greer would be followed by other people. Now this is a map of the homestake vein, or the outcropping. You can see some homestake company. You can see some Lead City up there at the top of Central City. Somewhere in that mess, so I should need a pointer. There's a little pink spot. You can kind of see it. You see where the mills are. There's a little pink spot. That's the homestake claim. That Hearst recognized immediately the effectively worked the homestake vein. He needed to capture all of this property. And he started immediately doing it in a variety of ways. One way was purchasing, and they purchased nearby claims, such as the Highland, the Giant, the Old Aid, the Golden Star. But then when they ran into other companies that already started, they started purchasing stock. So they do stock purchases of other companies. One formidable competitor was the Father de Smet, which held the claims on the end of the gold vein out by Central City. And the Father de Smet was a mine that Hearst wanted to acquire. They resisted, so Hearst and his partners started buying stock until they controlled the company. Many other claims, Hearst used a little more hard tactics. He would file lawsuits and repeated lawsuits. He had his own men cross state claims. He would file suits against other people saying they misstate their claim. At one time, Hearst had 30 to 40 suits going at one time for mineral claims, so he could try to get control of them. At times, the company was known for exerting some heavier influence, and they would beat men up who recalcitrant and wouldn't sell. And in one instance, in 1879, it's well documented that the Homestake killed a man named Alec Frankberg, who would not sell at the Pride of the West mine. Gunshots were exchanged, Frankberg was killed, 4 men were arrested, put on trial, and found not guilty. They were found, they were not convicted because the witnesses did not show up. People said that Hearst paid their way out of town. And at the end of the trial, the judge reportedly said, "I've never been so disgusted. The jury was all paid off." By Hearst, of course, he assumed. Well, the hard tactics did not win at Homestake any admirers at the time. As a newspaper reported, there was bitter feeling towards those Californians, as they generally called the Homestake company at this time. Another headline of the paper stated, "With the Homestake, it's the law of the strongest that settles mining claims." And as one historian has written, Hearst was a hard man. He did what he needed to accomplish what he wanted to. Hearst knew what he wanted as far as technology. He knew that the large stamp mills like he used in California was the way to crush this rock effectively and rapidly. And he brought imported California stamps to make this mine work. He brought in the 80 stamp mill in July 1878, the original Homestake mill, costing him around $100,000 to purchase and ship. The next year, he brought in 120 more stamps for the Golden Star mill. And these mills would recover between 70 and 75% of the gold. And with the mills coming up and going up, Leeds started getting an industrial plant right on the edges, the outskirts of Leeds, between the north and south forks of Gold Run Creek. This picture shows the Homestake mill on the left, the Golden Star in the center, the Highland, which became the Amicus on the right, and the old day head frame hoisting works above. I have a real soft spot in my heart for the auxiliary enterprise that Homestake started. And one of my favorites is the railroad. And the associated industry was started for the timber industry. The Homestake needed a lot of timber. They powered their entire mine plant by burning cordwood in the early days. And of course, when they started working underground and they started working in stopes, they needed lots of mine timbers. In December 31st, 1880, they ran an ad in a local newspaper asking for bids on a contract to get wood for them. They said they needed 40,000 cords of wood to burn, which was 110 cords a day at that time, and 1 million feet of mine timbers. The Northwestern Transportation Company got the bid and started harvesting timber up Whitewood Creek and up the Elk Creek drainage. Pretty soon they ran out of timber, and McMaster realized they needed to go much further, and he identified Elk Creek as the area he wanted to go. To reach Elk Creek and bring that timber back, he wanted to build a railroad. So in 1881, he started constructing the Black Hills and Fort Pierre Railroad here on the North Lead horizon, above where the open pit would be today. And the railroad left Lead, circled around through Inglewood, and ended up at Brownsville by 1882, where they served as the end of tracks of Brownsville for 7 years, as they effectively took every tree possible up and down Elk Creek drainage and elsewhere. Homestake then built, before I move on, built 2 branches from this railroad starting in 1889 over the next 10 years. One went down Elk Creek and Elk Creek Canyon, and one went over to Box Elder Creek. The branch that went over to Box Elder Creek eventually connected to Estes Creek, and the Homestake built a sawmill there at a place called Esty in 1898, which they operated in 1913. Nothing remains of this sawmill. But when they closed that sawmill in 1913, they built this sawmill at Nemo. This, when they built it in 1913, was the most modern sawmill in the Black Hills. It was the largest sawmill in the Black Hills. And Homestake would operate the sawmill from 1913 to 1935 and develop a little company town at Nemo, where they had a Hearst Mercantile and a population of around 500. Now, when they were harvesting the timber, the Homestake took anything they wanted. and that was a violation of federal law. Under the Free Timber Act of 1878, the company was limited to what they could harvest, the size of the tree they could take, but the Homestake ignored those parameters and eventually caught up with them. 1894, the government sued and said that for 17 years you've been harvesting trees illegally, and we want payment for 1 million trees. They wanted $700,000. Well, it went to jury trial in Deadwood, and the settlement was $75,000. Well, nevertheless, Thomas Greer was then knew this wouldn't continue, wasn't good, and to make the situation more troublesome, the President Cleveland had created the Black Hills Forest Reserve in 1897, the precursor to the National Forest, which said no logging was allowed. Well, Homestake knew that wouldn't work, and they continued logging. Well, luckily, Congress then passed what the Forest Service calls the Organic Act, which sets up the policy of being able to buy timber off of federal lands. And the nation's forester, Gifford Pinchot, worked with the Homestake, worked with Thomas Greer, and they executed timber case number 1, which then established the precedent for buying timber off of federal lands. The other branch, the second branch of the railroad, went down Elk Creek Canyon, one of the most beautiful places in the Black Hills. This picture is taken at the base of what's called Knife Blade Rock. When they built down Elk Creek Canyon, they turned their little railroad from just being a logging railroad into a common carrier. Down Elk Creek Canyon, they went out and connected with the Elkhorn Railroad at Piedmont, and they started then hauling freight and passengers from places all over the country into Lead, from Piedmont up the Black Hills and Fort Pierre to Lead. Here's a little passenger train post right at the base of Knife Blade Rock. And when they were down at Piedmont, they established this town. At least I should say the Homestake, in conjunction with the Fremont Elk Reserve Valley, established the town in Piedmont. They built a company, a railroad station, a company store, and the building towards the back, right on the left back, that is the Homestake Company store or the Hearst Mercantile. Not far from Piedmont, Homestake developed a location known as Calcite. This didn't come into existence until 1900 when cyanide came along. But at Calcite, the Homestake mined limestone, had lime kilns, and they used the lime in the cyanide process to improve recovery. Well, of course, the reminders of this little railroad are still here. The Homestake Roundhouse was started in 1900, and at that time, the Homestake sold the little railroad to the Burlington for $1 million, and they just finished the roundhouse at that time. And Burlington continued to run the railroad to some degree until 1983. And I'm sure that many of you remember Burlington running their trains in the North League Line and the South League Line over the old Black Hills Fort Pierre roadbeds. I remember vividly trains coming up to dump material into the red shed for the concrete company, and material being hauled down to the Homestake mine plant along the South League Line. And now Dakota Gold has kept this building in tip-top shape. Another asset that Homestake was needed to watch was their water. They needed a lot of water. As the Sharp Bits from 1954 says, our precious asset, our water, our liquid asset, pardon me. According to Dwayne Smith, 5 stamps, one set of stamps, used 23,000 gallons of water in 24 hours. And so Hearst understood this, and McMaster understood this, and they started buying water claims everywhere they could, using tactics very similar when they were trying to buy mining claims. And one time these tactics caused a little problem, and what here this newspaper article from the Black Hills Weekly Times says, the water question. And this was actually a mild way of saying, of identifying what's called the Great Water Fight. In 1879, Homestake bought an irrigation ditch, I call it a water ditch, that ran in front of the Father to Smith, the arch rival on Bedwood Creek. Homestake had no real use for it except to have leverage over the rival. The Father to Smith responded by buying the Boulder Ditch, which ran down Whitewood Creek, more useful for the Homestake. It became an ugly dispute. But neither company could prove a beneficial use for the water. And under territorial law, you had to have a beneficial use for water, or you lose the water right. So what did they do? Both companies offered to provide Deadwood free water. And the Deadwood citizens got a chance to vote what company they wanted the water from. Well, Homestake won, and they all said in the paper, at least the paper said, That's because they provided more liquor along with the boat. Judge Gideon Moody oversaw this case and said this was silliness, and he returned the ditches to the companies they rightly belonged. But it was really warned the Homestake they've got to do everything possible to make sure they control water. One of those things they did was to make sure they got every drainage in the northern hills serving the Homestake. And by 1900, Greer recognized they were running low on water to power the mills or to run their stamp mills. In fact, in 1900, he had to hang up some stamps because of lack of water. Well, they had the water rights at Upper Spearfish Creek. So in 1900, he designed a program, a project to run 20 miles of tunnels, conduits, and build a new pump station at Hannah. At the pump station at Hannah, they would pump the water out of the Spearfish Creek drainage and over to Whitewood Creek drainage. When this was done, as Dwayne Smith wrote, the company had 50 miles of ditches and flumes, the largest water owner in the Black Hills, and nothing strengthened its dominance in the region than its water control. Well, one of the big advantages or advances the company took was adopting cyanide. Greer knew they were losing 25 to 30% of the gold value in the cyanide in the process of crushing and amalgamating, and how to get the rest out. And he knew cyanide was around, that cyanide could dissolve gold. But it was a process that took some figuring out for everybody's different ore type. Well, eventually, Charles Merrill came to his attention, and he hired him in 1898 to come to try it at the Homestake. Merrill agreed, did a little pilot program, and Greer saw that he could do it. And he signed a 10-year contract. This is quite the contract. Instead of getting a salary, he would receive a percentage of the values of gold recovered. And after 3 years' work, he developed sand plant or cyanide plant number 1 over in Lee. And as the captain says at the bottom, savings of $50,000 per month. That was formerly lost. $50,000 a month formerly lost. Wonder how much of that Charlie Merrill got. And then he went on and built plant number 2 in Gayville. And then he realized that there was a clay-like slime floating off of those plants that he wanted to capture, that it had gold. So he developed the slime process in Deadwood. And as he said, once the slime process was satisfactorily working, that the sand and slime plants broke the world records for the low cost of treatments of sands and slimes, bringing the recovery to 94%. And the Homestake led the country in cyanide process. Greer was very also conscious of wanting to use electricity and modernize the plants, but he wanted to find the most cost-effective way to produce electricity. And so with the high-pressure water line coming from Hannah into Inglewood, by Inglewood, into Whitewood Creek, he built a hydroelectric plant in 1906. This successfully produced enough electricity to power 2 of the company's mills, turning it from steam power to electric power. That success convinced him to put more hydro plants on, one in Spearfish in 1911, and one here on Spearfish Creek at Maurice in 1970. One of the great fears of mining companies is when the ore will pinch out. And various theories were presented, various warnings were presented. In 1900, Greer said, we have 20 years of war left in sight, meaning the mine would close in 1920. But in 1919, company officials said, no, we have 17 years of war in sight, which means it would last till 1936. A geologist, Lawrence Wright, said it would pinch out at the 2,100-foot level. But Don McLaughlin came on board, a protege of Phoebe Hearst. He received his PhD in Harvard and was a consulting geologist at the Homestake in 1926. And he was convinced that the lode could be traced for many miles through the highly folded, metamorphosed Precambrian sediments, and it went much deeper, and he was proved correct. And the main ledge did extend for thousands of feet more, giving new life to the mine. Not only the main ledge added new life to the mine. When they were digging the Ross shaft in 34, they did some exploratory work down there, and they encountered the 9 ledge, and that produced 22% of the ore, main ledge 53%. So those two together produced the bulk of the Homestake ore from then on. Well, no mine is effective without the workers, and the Homestake had a famous history with their workforce. As Dwayne Smith wrote, the wages, paternalism, stability of the work made Lee unique among his contemporary mining towns and produced an unusually stable community. There was little of the transitory get-rich-quick attitudes of boom and bust Western towns. That's true. Something to be proud of. But there was one bump along the road, which Greer was involved with, and that was the famous 1909-1910 lockout. Miners that came to lead in 1877 had a history of unionism, and they formed the Lead Cities Miners Union, primarily benevolent and paternalistic organization. When the Western Federation of Miners was formed in 1893, the Lead Miners Union went to Butte, Montana, and became chapter number 2. But for 16 years, the WFM did not have a large influence in Lead, did not cause, I guess I would say, problems for the management. And then in 1909, an organizer came to Lead, recognizing that only half the workforce, half of the 2,500 workers, belonged to the union, and he convinced the union members to vote for closed shop. Greer said, we will not have a closed shop. We will hire non-union men. In fact, he announced that on January 1st, 1910, he would have a non-union workforce. The union responded, saying, we will strike. Before that, Greer took the upper hand and immediately announced a lockout on November 24th. The mine was closed. And this, the picture in the background, by the way, I should have pointed to it, was the miners' union hall built just about when this all started, 1893, where there was a miners' meeting hall and other businesses involved. Anyway, the lockout extended through January 1910. It's a hard time. When I studied labor history, and the lockout came at Thanksgiving, it's Thanksgiving time, and your husband, your daddy's not working. Christmas comes, nobody's working. Suddenly, you have second thoughts. And the union would go out of business, would close up. The union hall, as pictured here, would become derelict because there's no use for it, and it would be abandoned and torn down. And you can see there's a foundation there, yet that foundation survives. That's where the first national bank was built in 1923. Well, you take away the union, which had a lot of paternalistic functions, and you need to replace that with something. And as one historian wrote, to consolidate its victory over unionism, Greer widened the coverage of paternalism. In 1910, he eliminated the monthly hospital fee to employees, so hospital care became free. He expanded a Homestake aid fund for sickness and accidents. And in 1912, he began the construction of the Homestake Recreation Building, the beautiful building we're in today. Aiding and abetting Hearst in these paternalistic functions was Phoebe Hearst, and she's generally pointed to as the person responsible for the welfare of the employees in the town. She had a devotion to humanity. She created a Hearst Free Library in 1894, the kindergarten in 1900, and under her leadership, the Homestake built the recreation building. Dwayne Smith described her as having a medical style of gentle paternalism. Well, the Homestake was a success in part not from this last thing it had any direct control over. It had no control over the price of gold. And sometimes that could be difficult. Coming when the Homestake was opened in 1876, the price of gold was $20.67 an ounce, as set by the federal government. And gold stayed at that price through the early teens, through the 20s. Every other mine in the Black Hills closed because they could not afford gold at $20.67. They could not operate. Only the Homestake stayed alive. But it was tough by the late 1920s. Well, then the Depression hit. And in order to increase inflation and bring some prosperity, Franklin Roosevelt and the Congress increased the price of gold to $35. This increased Homestake's revenue by 50% and gave it a new lease on life, allowing it to expand the South Mill, dig the 8 shaft, build the Kirk power plant, and other expansion techniques at that time. Well, then gold was stuck at $35 an ounce through the 50s and the 60s. And by early 1970, things were tough, as many of you probably know. Well then, thanks to, when I teach American history, I always say my friend and hero, Dick Nixon. I say that as a joke. Dick Nixon came along and then Gerald Ford, and they set gold free. They eliminated the fixed price. They stopped gold backing the dollar, and they now allowed people to own gold, which had been forbidden. Gold shot up, $7 an ounce, then it came down. In its highs and lows, from 1985 to 1998 particularly, the Homestake recognized it had overlooked potential reserves in the open cut, which they had not mined since the 1940s, and they went back in the open cut for 13 years, as well as did more work underground. But gold got stuck at $240 an ounce. By the end of the 20th century, the mine struggled, and on September 11th, 2000, they decided to close the mine on December 31st, 2001. On June 2001, they announced a merger with Barrick Gold. The mine did close late 2001, early 2002. Of course, the closing of the mine did not end the legacy of the Homestake. It continues thanks to it being identified by the National Science Foundation as Deep Underground Research Facility in 2007, which is now we know as SURF. And the legacy of the Homestake Mineralized Zone continues as Dakota Gold is now mining or exploring for mining locations in the Homestake mineralized ground. And now with gold at $4,800 an ounce as of this morning, gold is attractive, and I'm sure lots of people out there looking for gold. On a closing note, I did not grow up in Lead, but I have strong Lead connections, I think. And you can look at this, the old Greer building, which was torn down in 1988. In the middle building, you see Wolf Market. That was my grandparents. They ran Wolf Market. They came here in early 1930s, and they stayed through the late 1950s. Their last store was on Baltimore Street. When they left, they sold it to Mrs. Beershee. My dad graduated from Lead High School, and he worked as a motorman from 1946 to 1947 in the mine. But I might add, his departure from the Homestake was not by his choice, but by my mother's choice. And there's quite a colorful story involved with that, and sometime, if you want to hear it, I'll tell it to you, but I won't tonight. Well, I thank you for allowing me the time to present, and don't forget to get your poster. And I'd like now to introduce the next speaker. Ann Delicate Thompson is the oldest of Don and Dorothy Delicate's 5 children. Don was the 8th manager of the Homestake Gold Mine in Lead from 1972 to 1979. Ann graduated from Lead High School in 1969 and graduated from the University of Wyoming with a business administration degree in 1973. Well, there, I might add, as a personal note again, she and I met in 1971. We both worked as resident assistants, sometimes known as proctors, in McIntyre Hall, McIntyre Dormitory. We've been friends ever since. And Ann will tell you a great story about a point in my book. Never mind. Ann's family lived in the Glover House when her dad was manager of the mines in Lead. When he became the manager and vice president of Homestake, they moved into the Homestake mansion. Ann and her husband Lynn owned Affordable Adventure Tours in Rapid City. Ann has run the company for 21 years. She loves history, and I know that for a fact. And she's glad to share a little about her history here in Lead. Help me welcome Ann.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is really, who would have thought when I was looking at movies here in the 1960s that I'd be standing up here someday? Never guessed that. So, anyway, this is really interesting because my talk is just way off, completely different than what Dave had to talk about. But I'm really thrilled to be able to tell you just a few stories about our family living in the Homestake Mansion. So, as we were told, I'm Ann Delicate Thompson, the oldest of Don and Dorothy Delicate's 5 children. There was Tom, Jane, Mike, and Kathy. So any of you that probably went to school with them, you know some of them were reprobates, so especially Tom. But anyway, we were the last family to live in the house. And, oh gosh, and you see this technology. I'm old, and this is really scary. Okay, thank goodness for my office assistant that put all this together. And, Stephanie, thank you. This picture here, my mother used it for a program for the 100th birthday of Homestake, and they had a big party at the house, and I'll show you some of that. But the house on the top was the second house for Homestake. And you had T.J. Greer that lived there, Richard Blackstone, and B.C. Yates. But you know, when they weren't filling the mine and things started sinking, Well, that house was starting to sink too. So they took the doorway out of it that had the stained glass and put that in the new house. And then they decided they're going clear to the other end of town where it wouldn't sink. And then they built it up there in 1933. So then you had B.C. Yates that moved in there, and Guy Bury, Ab Shoemaker, and then the Harders, and then finally we moved in there. And then after that, the next manager didn't really want to live there, I guess, and so then Homestake decided to do something else with it. So that's how we ended up here. Okay, this is just kind of a little summary of some of the things I'm going to talk to you about. First off, I need to tell you that we were there for 7 years, from October of 1972 until June of 1979. And my dad always said, I think I'm going to retire early because I see people that retire at 65 and die at 66, and I don't want to do that. So he decided he was going to retire at 56. So, and then after that, when they retired to Custer, he did do consulting until 1990. So he had a 42-year career with Homestake. But to go back and give you a little background of how we ended up in the house in the first place, my dad and mom were both raised in Custer. And when my dad was in the 7th grade in the summer, he wanted to go out and pan gold, and he found some gold close to where Horatio Ross found it on French Creek. And he decided then he'd like to be a mining engineer, and my grandma May Delicate made sure that she held him to that gold until he graduated after World War II from the University of Minnesota with an engineering degree, and he graduated with honors. And of course, when all of his 5 children graduated from high school, there wasn't one of us that knew what we wanted to do, and he knew in 7th grade he wanted to be a mining engineer, so we couldn't figure that one out. So. Anyway, but my mom also lived in Custer. Her dad had a little mine outside of Custer. They were mining feldspar, quartz, beryl, things like that. And so in the summers, my dad would work at my mom's mine, and then my dad's dad, Tom Delicate, had a bank in Custer. He came in 1890 in the middle of a blizzard on a stagecoach to start Custer County Bank, and he banked for 56 years. So my mother worked in my dad's bank. And she would work for each other's dads. And she was 4 years younger. But eventually, once he graduated, then they got married on January 1st.
Oh, that's kind of fun.
And then they moved up to Lead. Well, that was the start of my dad's 42-year career when he ended up being the 8th manager then at Homestake. So I think that they originally had kind of the idea that they were going to go ahead and train him to go into management because he had the engineering degree. And so he did a lot of things. He worked in the mining, he worked in the geology department all over the place. And so then that really was good because he really got a lot of background on all the different things about the mine, and it was very helpful to him when eventually he became manager. Well, in the early days, now my mother was an April 3rd baby, so this is almost like April Fool's, and she was a real prankster. And one time, when she always made my dad's lunches, she decided to put rocks in his lunchbox.
Oh no.
And that's the day they sent him down the mine.
Oh no.
She done that because she had a note in there that says your lunch is in your car.
Oh no.
The miners really felt sorry for your dad, so they all shared their lunch with him. And when he came home and told her what happened, she was mortified. And she never did that again. Even when she tells the story years later, she said, I never did it again. So anyway, she got that one covered on that one. But when I was 3 years old, in 1954, hitting the wrong buttons, my dad got moved to LaSalle, Utah, to help start a uranium mine there. And so we lived in a mining camp in some Spartan trailers, and then they moved into the little village of LaSalle, and Charlie Red was a Mormon guy, and he had a whole bunch of kids, so he sent them to Salt Lake to go to school. So we got to live in this great big house. I think we've always lived in big houses. I don't know what that deal is. But anyway, it was 2 little kids. My brother Tom was born, and I was, and we got to live in this big house in LaSalle. And we were there for about 3 years. And then in 1957, we got moved down to Grants, New Mexico with the uranium down there. And that was the superintendent of the Homestake Sapin miners mine down there. He was the superintendent. And you know what? I mean, Grants was great. I was there first grade through seventh grade. But, man, we come up here in the summers, and I love the Black Hills. When he announced that we were going to move back, I was thrilled. And, you know, one of our chores was to sweep the grass and get the dirt off the grass, and we were trying to grow grass down there. So it was great to come back to the beautiful Black Hills with the trees, and this is just wonderful. So finally, in December of 1963, we moved back here. We actually stayed up in those Homestake apartments until we could get moved into a house on Summit, and then we ended up in the Glover house for a while. And then finally, when Dad became the 8th manager, that's how we ended up in the Homestake house. And I do remember people said to my mother, "We're so glad that you're all in there with so many kids because there's lights on. It looks lived in, you know." So, but when we first moved in there, my dad said to us, "I want you all to take in mind that I am the manager, and this is a big house, but you are no better than anybody else in lead, so don't be acting like that. There are great people here, and we're just a family that's borrowing this house." And I think we all took that to heart, so, because we were a pretty normal family in that house, let me tell you. Except for a few things we had to do when he was manager, but I thought that was good advice, because the people in Lee are great, and we weren't any better than the rest, and we enjoyed living here and growing up here. So, my younger sister always said, "Well, I never thought I was any better than anybody else. I had my friends come over and we did whatever we wanted, you know, we just lived in a big house." So that's how it was. Finally, I get to go to that picture when I there were a few things that were a little different about being in the house, let me tell you. One of them was that Irma Larson was hired to cook and clean and do things like that, because Mom was expected to entertain. As a manager, there's big, ballroom, and she had to help entertain. And so she needed some help because she couldn't do it all. And so they hired Irma, and I need to tell you, she was a delight. We never did think of her as a Homestake employee. She was just our friend. And she laughed, she had the best laugh. And so she helped cook and clean and do things around the house. And she gave my dad a tree here when he was going to retire down to Custer. She bought him a tree for the yard there. So she was just real thoughtful. She was real candy and coming up with really great gifts. But anyway, whenever there was going to be parties or anything, then she would help Mom. And a lot of times Dad would bring people home for lunches, probably so he wouldn't have his kids around to sit at the table and talk. But he would invite them home for lunches. So Mom and Irma would get together and figure out what they were going to do to put together a lunch for him. And then she would get it all ready. And underneath the table, underneath the carpet, was a little buzzer. And so my mom could sit at the end of the table, and if we could water or anything, she could push that buzzer, and Irma could come in and see if there's something that needed to be helped. So that worked really slick. It was very smooth. Nobody had any idea. All of a sudden, she just showed up. It's a secret. So anyway, but my mom was very gracious, and I have a book. It's about this thick. Every single lunch, dinner, party, whatever it was, she put all the information in that book. And it was a godsend. I went back through to find some of the stuff that was programmed. But she wrote everything down. And the details, she was so meticulous, and I'm sure that's why she was such a great hostess. But she said she usually averaged entertaining over 800 people a year.
Wow.
Lunches or dinners or parties. And, it just went smoothly because of her organization. And many of you know my mom, or knew her, and another organization. She was always very organized. So it was pretty great. So anyway, they would put this lunch together. So when we had big parties, there it is, the 100th birthday of Homestake. And we had George Fassbender take this picture. So fortunately, this is in the Fassbender collection now, and I got this from Richard because I couldn't find my picture. But Mom wanted everybody to dress up in period clothes if they wanted to. They didn't have to. And if they did and wanted their picture taken, I took the pictures of the couples, and then she made reprints for them. But George took this picture, and they had 67 people at this dinner. And so it's really fun to see some of the outfits and everything that they had. And my sister Kathy, youngest one, always at the guest book. She goes, "I always had to do the guest book." So anyway, that's what they did here. And then here is a few pictures of us. Now, Mom and Dad, in the one picture there, my dad's actually wearing my Grandpa Tom's suit and
that's
tie
cool.
and hat. So my Grandpa Tom is a little bigger guy, so that actually worked good. They could wear the same clothes. And my mother, God love her, I don't know, she must have done this between midnight and 6. She made all of our clothes, as well as putting on this party and getting it all organized. So she made the dress, and in the middle picture, is myself, my mom, my brother Mike, and my sister Kathy, and then my dad. And there's another picture of us there. And then down below is the 100-year birthday cake. So we're having 150 tonight. This was 100 that they had for that. So anyway, then she had a program, and that's what the pictures of the houses were on the front that I first showed you. This was her program, and she decided to take the Centennial Cookbook and go through and get some of these menus and food items from people around the Black Hills. So she had like baked beans from W.E. Adams White, French dressing from Mrs. F.L. Floor, spoon bread from Mrs. F. Bullock. I mean, you know, it was so cool. And then Stephanie typed the things along the side because it's a little hard to read. It's so thin, you know, from being so old. So she typed with all they had. It was a ton of food. And so all us older kids had to help serve that. And so they had done the laundry room, the stove there, and they had all the food there. And they fill the plates, and then we go out and serve everybody their plates, and then we take them back at the end and help do dishes and things like that. So that's what us older children did. But I thought that was really cool. She used this for Centennial, that she had this kind of a menu. So that was pretty creative on her part. Now this shows the pictures in the ballroom. In the big long living room, there was a ballroom underneath. And it was a big long room, and that's exactly what it was for, parties. So here's some pictures of some people sitting at the tables. They usually have like a few. And the middle one, down at the end, had the HMC candles. So of course my mother made those. My brother Michael, I remember helping Mom make those candles. She used them in all the parties. So anyway, that was there. And then you can see how they lined up and how we would just go through and we could serve them that way. And then up in the corner is Paul and Betty Henshaw. My mother's, because she was such a dear, she just was so not welcoming to people. The Henshaws fell in love with my mother, and they loved to come up for the parties, especially some of the, you know, the big staff parties. And this is a picture of them right there. And then, so I'm going to flip them along here. Yeah, I've gone through this so many times that I needed my notes, but sometimes. Oh, I know something I was going to tell you. And some of you can probably relate to this, having lived here. Irma was not expected to do all this cooking by herself for all these big parties. They would hire Mary Pinerio and Elizabeth Lane a lot of times to come and help. And that was wonderful to have them because, boy, it was a big job to feed so many people and make the food. So, then just to go back, I kind of jump around to different parts of the house, but this story came to me about my sister Jane, and I think a few of her friends are here tonight. You know, Jane was a great sunbather, as you probably know, and she loved to go out and lay in the yard. And I thought, what a waste of time. There's too many things in the world to do besides lay in the sun. But not Jane, she loved it. And so my dad came home one day and he said to my mother, Dorothy, if you keep Jane in the house, those young high school kids out there mowing and trimming the hedge are going to cut the whole hedge down. I mean, she was cute. I can understand that. It was great. But anyway, so they would help Bernie Russo because he did a lot of the yard work around, and that's why the house always looks so nice. He did a great job of taking care of it. So, but just some elements of the house that were kind of interesting to me. Being a big house, and I lived in big houses, but a lot of them didn't have these things. There was a chute that you drop the clothes down to go down to the basement to be washed. But the really nice thing is there was a dumbwaiter. And you could put the baskets on there so they could go pull the ropes and they go back up the floor. So Irma didn't have to haul those heavy baskets and things back up to the different floors after they were washed and cleaned, which I thought was really cool. And then There was also a mangle in there to do big tablecloths for all these parties and whatnot, but my mom didn't want Armin to have to deal with that mangle, so she sent a lot of things to the local laundry, and then she didn't have to deal with that. But there were big rolls on the back stairway upstairs, so some of those big tablecloths that you could use for the lawn, for those long tables, they could just roll them on the thing there, and they could take them out when they needed them. So that was kind of interesting. Then in the master bedroom, there was an old black phone, and I was wondering what that was for. And then Dad said one time, well, it's between the house and the mine. If there's ever an emergency and they need to get a hold of me, they can do that. And I never heard it ring, thankfully, but it was always there if anybody ever needed to reach it. And you know, he used to try to call home and the line would be busy. And with 5 children, he told Mother, he said, Dorothy, we are getting a team line, so I can call you when I need to. So we did have a team line in our house, so that the phone line would be freed up. So we got that. Now, for such a big house, there were tiny closets in it. I could never understand that. They must have used armoires or wardrobes or something too. But the main closets were just small little things, but they were lined with cedar, so they smelled beautiful. But you couldn't put much in them. So anyway, there was one in the master bedroom, the middle room, which was a kind of a guest room, and I also used that room. And then there was another room, it was Jane's room. And then the rest, further down the hall, was maid's quarters. Now, we never had to live in a maid, we just had too many kids. So we had to put my brothers and sisters down in those other rooms. And there was a little alcove where Mom could have her office, and that's where she masterminded all the amazing things that she did. But that's what we did. And in those 3 main rooms, they had the most beautiful bathrooms. They were gold-plated fixtures, because Homestake in 1933, like Dave said, you know, they were still making a lot of money then. And so they decided to really do up the house nice. And in the master bathroom, I wish I had pictures, but I couldn't find a picture book of the house pictures. But there was a big bathroom, big deep tub, and it had burgundy with black trim along the tub. And then in the bedroom and the bathroom that where I was lavender and yellow. And in Jane's bathroom, the tiles were green and pink. And so very interesting there. And the tubs were so deep, you could run hot water forever. I think they had 150 gallon hot water heater. And if you got started to cool off, you let a lot out, and some more hot water. It was great, and they were so deep, you got water all over your neck. So I've never seen a tub like it since. It was amazing. So anyway, and then the hot water heater was in this huge boiler room off the garage, and it was this real deep, dark, eerie thing, and then up above it was the hot water heater. And Jane would take her friends in there, and they'd go in and they'd look at that deep, scary place and they'd not screaming. You know? It was kind of crazy. But in the room where I was, there was a desk in there that belonged to Thomas Greer. And it was the coolest desk. You could sit on either side. And there was drawers and everything else on both sides. So 2 people could be sitting there working, I guess, as a big desk. And I haven't ever seen one like that since. And of course, as Dave mentioned, that Thomas Greer worked with Phoebe Hirsch on all sorts of things, and we can be grateful for this beautiful building, thanks to both of them getting that orchestrated in 1914. And then in the basement was another thing that I thought was really great. It was a cold room. And there's all these shelves in there, and there's a big window up at the top, and there's little levers on it, and they would automatically open and close depending on the temperature in there, so you could put your canned goods and everything. So we had to come downstairs and get canned goods whenever it was needed to cook, you know, up above. So I thought that was an interesting invention. Now, when the hospital was given the house was given to the hospital, I don't know who put a hot tub in there, but that eventually got taken out because that was a bad idea, and that they made a doorway out of the cold room, so it's not there anymore. And now this picture here, this was our favorite room. Off the big dining room, which had the big glass windows that you could look down on Main Street in the town of Lee. There was right beside it a little library room. And you can kind of see there, the 2 sides were windows, and we put couches there, and then along the other wall was all these bookshelves. and there was tiling underneath, but there was carpet on the floor when we moved in. And it was just such a cozy room, and there was a fireplace in there. And my dad, a lot of times, would start a fire and just relax before dinner. But if we were going to have a family meeting and go decide about a trip or something we were going to do, if we're going to the cabin or something, this was our favorite place because it was so cozy. We could just all visit as a family. And we loved this room. It was just really comfy. But going off beside my mother in the picture, you can see going off into the big living room. You can kind of see the grand piano there as well. The big living room was great. I mean, it was great if you were doing like Christmas and had all of us there, or if we were having a meeting or something. And it was really great too for my brother Mike, who every year wanted a 14 to 15-foot Christmas tree, which took us half a day to go find the perfect tree also. And so finally, my dad would get on the ladder trying to get the lights put around the tree, and he almost fell off the ladder into the tree. So we had to grab him, and he got down and he said, Michael, from now on, if you want this bigger tree, you get to put the lights on the tree. So after that was Michael's job. So anyway, but I'll go to the next one. Oh, I did want to mention something for some of you. This picture here with me in the library room, that's Joel and Jean Waterman. I don't know, some of you may have known them. He was with Homestake for a long time. But this is our tree, and it's beautiful. I mean, but it's crazy having to decorate that big of a tree. But Michael loved it. So anyway, down at the end was a big fireplace that was great where we could hang all our stockings. So we would have Christmas and things like that in there as well. Now, also, we had meetings, get-togethers. It was a perfect place if you're going to have a big group of people. And my mom was in PEO forever. And she was a past state president, and she was just a great supporter of PEO. And so they own a college in Nevada, Missouri, called Scotty College. And so they would invite high school girls to come over, and they would tell them information about it, hoping that some of them might want to go to Scotty College. And this is a picture here where they had a tea form. So in the dining room, we had the table all set up. They could have things to eat. And then they came in the living room to hear about Scotty College. So the basement down where the ballroom was, when the house was built, they built a room in there that had wood paneling and a big fireplace. It's called the smoking room. So the men could go down there and smoke in the evening after dinner or whatever. And that got to be my brother Tom's bedroom for quite a while. Eventually my brother Mike ended up down there too. Irma would make cookies and put them in the freezer. And Mike's room was down there, and he'd get up in the night and get the cans out and start eating the cookies, and he'd put them under his bed. And when she'd go to look for cookies, they were gone from the freezer. But anyway, that was really a cool room in there. Now, my brother Tom also, for any of you that knew my brother Tom, I was kind of the square. He was kind of the one that kind of was out there. He really liked that greenhouse, and he grew a lot of plants, and not all of them. That's all I'll say about that. And I don't know how he got by with doing that, but my dad didn't know that. So anyway, that, like Dave says, that's another story for another time. But anyway, then off the ballroom, there was a little tiny room. And my dad made that into a workshop. And my brother Mike loved working with wood. Well, then Dad decided he wanted to make sure we didn't watch too much TV. And so he put the TV in there. And of course, we never watch TV. Who wants to go down in the basement? And so it was put in there. Well, then the workshop got moved to the first floor of the greenhouse. So Mike did a lot of things there. And he said he always thanked Mr. Dahl from Deadwood. He said he learned so much about woodworking from Mr. Dahl. Then, in the kitchen, there was a little breakfast nook, and it had a little table with some booze. And an interesting thing about my father, he loved to make breakfast, so he always got up and made breakfast. So he always made it, at least for he and his mom, and for he and Mom, and then Mom would get up and make things for us before we went to school, things like that. But that was really a cozy little place, and we didn't all have to go sit at the big dining room table in the dining room. And in the kitchen, there was all these big cupboards. There was just two big bins, because back in the day, they made their bread. Had a big bin for flour and for sugar. I'm not sure we ever did much with that. And in between the kitchen and the dining room was a pantry. And my mom always had so many different sets of dishes so she could entertain. So she kept a lot of those things in there between that in that pantry there. And of course, you know, she was so meticulous when people would come to the house. And Paul and Betty Henshaw, she just tried to do whatever to make sure they were comfortable when they were there. Since he was the president, I mean, she did that for anybody, but you know. And Paul liked coddled eggs. Now, I don't even remember it, but apparently they're coddling cups, and you put them in water. And so she got some coddling cups so she could make coddled eggs for Paul to go with his burnt toast. So anyway, she was always, you know, trying to be accommodating. But Kathy always said that people would get confused when they were trying to come to our house for Halloween. They couldn't figure out which door to go to, whether it was the front door or the rear door. And we got to come back here. So this picture, you see these two pictures here of the front door. This is in the wintertime where their vines are all dead. And along the sidewalk, one of the things we brought with us from New Mexico was luminarios. And we all had to fill the bags of sand and candles. And then we light those up along the walkways there for the Christ child to come. And so that we had that. But you can see the stained glass, and that's the only thing that came from that old house down by the mine. And then the other picture here is when our daughter Molly married Mike Vanderhayden in 2016. And the Coes were gracious enough to let us use the house, since we had lived there, to have her wedding. And so that was we were pretty excited about that. And then we also had other kinds of things. We had, well, one thing that I was going to tell you before the receptions is my sister Kathy one time, we all wanted a horse. Fortunately, none of us got it but her. And they brought it home one day, and she took the horse in the house, and why, I don't know. See, we were a normal family, maybe not so much. But anyway, the horse came in and looked at that gold carpet and tried to start eating it. And so my mom goes, Kathy, get that horse out of here. So anyway, I don't know. Yeah, crazy. But anyway, a lot of her friends would ask her, how many rooms are in that house, you know, so. But the thing that Jane said that she remembered is it was such a nice house for receptions. And that's what we have here. We celebrated my mom and dad's 25th wedding anniversary. And of course, my mother, she made all of our outfits, probably from mid-96. But anyway, this is when there was another anniversary. And then we had the table all set up so people could come in and grab something to eat and some punch and things like that. And then also, my grandma and grandpa, Ross, Mom's mom and dad, we celebrated their 50th anniversary. And then my sister Jane, she got married in 1977 to Ted Hall from Deadwood. And she had a huge cake there in the dining room. And there's her helping cutting. And Paul and Betty Henshaw even came. I didn't remember that, but there they are in the picture. So, and then Jane out by the front door. And then you can see in the basement down there, they used the ballroom. And so we could sit along the sides and read. Guess we had a dance. And these are a few more pictures of it that give you an idea. And see, we even set up food in the ballroom. There was just so much room down there, so it really worked slick to be able to do those things. So, anyway, and then this picture, this is our wedding, but I put this in here because there's a gas pump. I mean, how many of us have gas pumps at our house, you know? But Homestake had a gas pump in case we needed gas. And now we could go up to the mine shop and get gas, but they had one there too. So if Dad needed gas, I guess they could do it. And here's a picture of my dad with a dog. We always had a dog at our house. So, you know what? Yeah, I mean, they were just part of our family. So we were always glad to have them there. And then, as I mentioned, in the big living room, there was that grand piano. That was always pretty cool. Mom liked to play that, and sometimes she'd have us sing in church, and we'd all practice at the piano. And Jane played the piano too, so sometimes she did. Now, Kathy liked to play basketball with her brothers and friends out in the yard. They had a big hoop like that. And when she was a kid, I mean, she was just a little bit, you know, because she and I are 13 years apart. She'd take her shirt off just like the boys and get out there and start playing basketball. So, anyway, fortunately, she could grow up. And I have to tell you about the welcoming thing, but for my mom and dad. My mother-in-law, Andy and father-in-law, Andy and Anita Thompson, when they were going to come and meet my parents, she was a nervous wreck. She goes, oh my gosh, she's an answer. They live in that big house. I don't fit there. I just shouldn't be going there. Well, you know, I said, it's fine. Mom and Dad are really nice people. And she said, as soon as I got to the door, and Dorothy gave me a big hug, and she was standing there in a pantsuit, and the dog was laying on the couch, and it was going to be all right. So, anyway, that worked good. And then one time, my husband Lynn, I brought him up from Spearfish so that he could come up for dinner. We were driving up towards the house, and he goes, wonder who lives in that huge house. Wow. But I guess we did have second thoughts because we've been there almost 47 years. It didn't scare him away. So anyway, but you know, I mean, we were loaned a big house, and we really appreciated living in it. And I mean, we had a few extra things that Homestake helped us with so that we could take care of it and do the things that we needed to do. But we always really appreciated it, and I appreciate now that Gary and Sandy Coe have taken good care of it. They've gone in and done some refurbishing that needed to be done, woodwork that needed to be redone. They did some things to the roof, and I appreciate that because it's a very historic home and it needs to be taken care of. And just one side note, I wasn't going to tell this, but I have to. You know, there was the regional hospital, and then Dan and Kevin Costner had it for a while, and then Keller Properties had it. And so they were renting it out. And so we decided to stay there one night, and Mom had to sign a 5-page lease agreement just to stay overnight, that she'll take care of the house, she won't do anything to it. And the silver water fixtures were leaking water. It was a mess. She goes, they made me sign this agreement and they aren't taking care of it. And so they asked for comments. And my mother she loved everybody and she was very kind. But when something bothered her, she let people know in a very tactful way that she said, you know, if you're going to own this house, it's very historic, you need to take care of it because you have leaking water and plumbing and there's some other things that need to be taken care of. And they did call and say, we appreciate you saying that and we'll certainly put some attention to it. Now, whether they ever did, I don't know. We never went back again. But anyway, so, you know, it's today a beautiful home. And I'm so grateful that it's here. We were grateful to live in it. But you know what? It's moved on. And this last picture, this is my mom and dad enjoying relaxing out on the front porch. I mean, there was a lot of times when it was stressful for my dad as a master. But at least they could come home and relax in the evening. And there's the hedge. It wasn't cut down because Jane had to come in the house from somewhere. But that was pretty much the way it was for us there. And we were very grateful to be allowed to live there for the 7 years. And I'd like to thank you for allowing me to share some of my stories tonight. It probably went longer than I was supposed to, but I just had to share it. I'd like to introduce Jerry Aberley, and he's going to be the next speaker. Jerry is a lifelong resident of the Black Hills and a 1980 graduate of the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology with a degree in mining engineering. He began his career at Homestake in the deep levels of the mine and went on to serve in a wide range of engineering and management roles, contributing to long-range planning and many aspects of the operation of Homestake. He purchased and transformed the drug Staver stamp mill into a popular local destination, then have since worked on mining exploration projects worldwide. He co-founded Dakota Gold with former Homestake exploration geologist Rick Bachman to resume gold exploration in the northern hills at the point Homestake curtailed exploration in 1994. Please join me in welcoming Jerry Aberley.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here to speak a little bit to the homestake culture. And it's a funny thing for a guy that can't stop talking about homestake. I have a hard time figuring out exactly where to start. But really wasn't one homestake culture. It was 130 years of operations here. A lot of different cultures. And those cultures varied over time depending on the management, depending on the workforce, and especially depending on the times. And what I decided to do is talk about the Homestake culture in the time that I worked there. But to do that, I wanted to provide just a little historical context and what the Homestake was when I started working there. As you know, and as Dave talked about, Homestake was created here out of the middle of nowhere. And getting a workforce here and keeping a workforce here was certainly a challenge. It was largely an immigrant workforce in the beginning. And at one time, I got to spend a couple weeks in the safety department. I was reading old accident records. And it was so interesting that there were a lot of employees that couldn't even speak English. And if you think about the challenge in that, the different cultures and even language barriers in mine, it was a difficult thing to get a good workforce and to keep it. And that coupled with competition for employees here in the Northern Hills and mining, especially after cyanide made a lot of the other mines economic, Homestake invested in workforce development, and David talked about some of those things. There was health care for employees, a municipal water system, school systems, this opera house, and a lot of civic things that were done in the community by Homestake. And growing up here in the 60s and the 70s, you felt that. There was a sense of permanence about Homestake, that we grew up a Homestake family, and that was part of us. And there was also a sense that you belonged to something big, and Homestake was a big thing. And it was North America's deepest gold mine. It was America's biggest gold mine, and it had a 100-year history, and it had its own marching band. The early 70s were really a time of a lot of challenges for Homestake. As David mentioned, there had been a fixed gold price since the 30s at $35 an ounce. The mining industry had a lousy track record, and that kind of culminated with the Sunshine Mine fire, which brought about the creation of M-Shell in the early 70s. Well, that was a good thing for mining over time. It was really a challenge at the time to change the organization and how things were done. At the same time, the Clean Water Act came into effect and the EPA was created. It had huge implications for Homestake. What had been socially acceptable forever here was suddenly going to have to change, and Homestake was told that you could no longer put your tailings in Whitewood Creek. That changed everything, and it was difficult. And because of the gold price, there was really no money for that. And on top of all that, EEOC came into effect, and while those were all good things in the long run, it was a big change for Homestake, which had been largely just a man-dominated business. Internally, there had been a strike in 1972, and it was a difficult time for labor relations and company relations and figuring out how to go with that. And it was a time of huge turnover here, 30% turnover in the 70s, and that had a lot to do with the economy. It was also a time when people came and went from places like the Silver Valley, Butte, Montana, the uranium mines in New Mexico, but there was this huge turnover here. And that resulted in training issues and obvious problems with productivity and safety. The second century started in 1976, which coincidentally was the year I first started. And so I'm going to talk about the culture in Homestake from my perspective, which was the second century of Homestake. I started at Homestake in the fall of 76. And I was going to school at Tech, and I had come up looking for a part-time job, and there were a few people doing that. And I got a job working in the labor pool at first, and then I was moved to the shaft and pressure crew. In the year between my senior and junior year, I got a chance to work in the engineering office as a mine engineer, and I hired out full-time in 1980. The miracles of that experience was as I graduated it all. The second thing was the money. I had been working in the library at School of Mines in a work-study program for $2 an hour, and I was making between $9 and $14 an hour at Homestake. The second thing about that, well, about the money, I was able to pay for my education as I went along. I mean, I was writing checks for tuition, room and board, and I graduated without any college debt. It was an amazing thing. And that was something that Homestake did, and I wasn't alone in that. There were summer work programs that people got to participate in. It made all the difference to a lot of people in this town. And it was an investment in people. So really in the 1980s, what I want to talk about is the culture at Homestake, and that was the environment of the culture. And what happened in the 80s was it was a time of change. The good news was the gold price had been separated from the currency, and during the late 70s, the gold price went up to $700-800. And that whole thing bought time and created opportunity for Homestake to change. And the next 2 decades were full of change and continuing challenges. But it was also a time when the economy in the country was, you probably remember, 20% interest rates. And that transient workforce that we had in the past kind of went away. And it got tougher to get a job at Homestake, and people stayed for a long time. I think some of the things that we had going for us in the 80s was 2/3 of the workforce, even though we had 30% changing every year, 2/3 of the workforce never stayed or never left. They were people that stayed. In a lot of cases, they were second, third generation Homestake people, and they were people that were career people at the mine, and it meant something to them. I think one of the biggest things Homestake had going for them was the senior workforce and frontline management. I look back at the people that were shift bossing when I started there, and they were a lot of World War II era men that had grown up in the Depression, and they had a sense about what was important, and they had a lot of experience, and you got to see all kinds of leaders and forms of leadership. There were great role models in that, and for Homestake, they were the way management communicated with the people that were working in the mine and back and forth. And they had a way of getting things done that was really important to Homestake's success. Another thing about Homestake that I think was a big part of the culture there was the management system and the systems. It was a 100-year-old mine at that time, and it had a management system that was developed over a lot of time, and it just worked. There were clear lines of responsibility and authority, and people knew who did what, and everybody knew what their job was there. And by the 80s, there was a new kind of cooperation, not necessarily at first, but between management and the union. As time went on, there was a lot more cooperation, especially in areas like safety, and the union became a voice for the workforce. What do the people want? How can we help achieve those goals? Some of the things that changed, everything changed. And at the mill, I mentioned the creation of the EPA, the Clean Water Act. In a matter of 4 years, Homestake had to go from challenging the EPA to saying it was going to close, to coming up with a plan. And by 1977, there was a tailings facility being built at Grizzly Gulch. And all that was managed with the people and the engineers and the organization at Homestake. On top of that, then, and following getting the tailings out of the creek, there had to be wastewater treatment that dealt with the cyanide. There was really nothing in the world that did that. And right here in Leeds, South Dakota, there were some mad scientists. Terry Nutter, Jim Whitlock, Fred Fox. This is worth relating because it is the sense of Homestake. They figured out that they couldn't balance the cyanide, and they figured out that there was a bacteria in the pipelines that was consuming. And so these guys were growing bacteria in petri dishes and super bacteria and more bacteria. And they invented a process right here in East South Dakota to solve an unsolvable problem. And they did it in a short order. And it wasn't just guys like those. It was everyday people at Homestake that were about solutions. And part of that problem is there was no instrumentation for that could measure what you were doing with the detection limits. And somebody just said, why don't we put a tank below this treatment plant and put fish in it, and if they die, you got
If the day you die, then we finish. Try
That's
again.
how things got done, and that is the culture that I'm talking about. In the mine, David mentioned the changes that included remining the open cut, and that was done because you could put that ore through the mill, and there were improvements to the process made at the mill. You could do that to help with the overheads of running this operation that was operating out of a 30-year-old plant that was built during the Depression. The open cut was a big departure from what we were doing. And again, a culture of can-do, and just in a matter of a few years, there was a test pit being mined, and it was in production by, I think, 84. The mine was changing too. There was a lot of development being done, and the mine below the 6800 was all being developed at that time for mining. I think some of the first stopes were just in the early 80s, and some of those people are here tonight. There were ventilation systems, and it was a huge undertaking, and all the problems with heat and new ventilation systems and all of the things. And over the 22 years that I worked in a mine, Homestake drove a mile adrift a month, every month. It's an incredible thing that was done in the mine. I often wish you could turn it inside out to show people what people did here and what was built there. But all that was change, and all of it was new, and change comes hard for a workforce, especially a big one. And I think it's a testament to the workforce that I worked with, the changes that were accomplishment, and in particular in mining. And I'm talking about the mine and mill because that was where my background was. But in mining, there were three kinds of mining when I started there. There was timber cut and fill, open cut and fill, and shrink screws. And in a matter of a few years, and it was something that I got to work on, there was long hole stoping, there was vertical crater retreat, and then there was mechanization, mechanized cut and fill. And this workforce, as fast as we could come up with new equipment, was figuring out how to mine with it. And that was the people that were working in the mine. Jumbos came in, and we tried undercuts, we tried breast mining, and we took all sorts of different variations. And it was a great time of innovation, and it was a tribute to the people that worked there, all of them. Maintenance and admin and the support functions all went through big changes at the same time. It was a plant with aging infrastructure, and the maintenance department had a huge load with that. And then you added to that all the new ventilation systems, and all the new equipment was going into the mine. There were all kinds of efficiency changes and all these changes. And through that whole time, the workforce was there and making it happen. I think it's hard to imagine a more interesting place to work, at least for me. I used to tell people about working in the mine, and you could have just as well worked on the moon. People that work there, like in Northdrift, dealt with 130-degree water and all the things. It was an amazing accomplishment. It was a testament to the people that worked there. All of them. Through all those times, and there were some tough times in there, I think it was a really positive work environment. Not always, and it was never perfect, and not all the bosses were great bosses, and all of those things. And I remember one time I was talking to a shift boss. I was a young engineer, and I'd gone with him in the morning, and we went back to his doghouse at lunchtime, and the whole time I was bitching about my job. And he was trying to start his notes and was trying to order materials, and he finally set his pencil down and he turned to me, and his face was about this far from me, and he said, "Jerry, if you ever find that perfect thing that you want to do, the thing that fulfills you, there ain't nobody going to pay you for that bullshit." And it really was true. Well, it wasn't perfect working for Homestake. Homestake was a good place to work, and especially the people that worked there were great people to work with. I think it's a universal thing that people that lost their jobs at Homestake miss most the people that work there. I think some of the biggest accomplishments of that time were the change and the adaptation that was necessary to keep it going, and that went clear back to that culture of they were part of something big. The workforce expertise and the commitment. I talked about that turnover that was going on in the 70s. By the time I left in the late 90s, the average employee was 44 years old with 17 years of service. And it's remarkable. There was exceptional teamwork in the mine, and everybody that went in the mine, and this was really all over the mine. I keep talking about the mine, but all over the property. People depended on other people, and everybody had the capacity to make a mistake that had bad consequences for a lot of people. And there was a sense of teamwork I just haven't seen that since. And it's something that I've tried to convey to everybody at Dakota Gold, at the stamp mill, in the construction business. And it's hard to do, and it was that culture at Homestake, and it's hard to create that. It was something. I think one of the most amazing things about Homestake is that most people during the day tended to work by themselves. They might have a partner in there, but you were by yourself, and you had all kinds of problems present themselves during the day, and you had to solve them. And again, it was an amazing place, but a motorman with a piece of pipe and a wedge could put a locomotive back on the track, and they did it routinely. And it was a process of assessing a problem and solving it and doing it safely. And it was part of that culture, and it's just a really unique thing, I think. Some of the biggest accomplishments is the safety record at Homestake. Homestake always cared deeply about its employees and safety, but there was a revolution in safety concepts and accountability during the time that I was there, and that's something I'll carry with me forever. I think a lot of people do. It's really important, and it meant something. Equal opportunity, and I just mentioned this because I'm just amazed that in Washington, D.C., which is where this legislation came from, that there's still problems today. I think this speaks to Homestake and the people that work there, that in starting there in 1976, they said, your first day there's women that work here, and we don't tolerate any kind of harassment or abuse or anything. And there just really wasn't any. And that in the mining industry, I think that's unique also. And that was back in the 70s, and today corporations still struggle with this problem. I don't recall that that was an issue for us at all. And again, it was the people that worked there and the management. And finally, productivity. During this time that I worked there, the productivity nearly doubled at Homestake during that time. And yet, in the end, all that had been done, I don't think the workforce ever let Homestake down. Everything the workforce was ever asked to accomplish was accomplished, and yet it was things beyond the control of the people that worked there, and that was gold things. $280 gold for a long time. It just, it was a tough thing, and that's really what you just couldn't fix the gold price. But other than that, we had a workforce and a team and management and the workforce that I just felt like could and did accomplish anything. It was really something. I was proud to be part of it. That's all I got.
Along with these three fantastic guests that we've had come forward, there is another special guest here. I'm not going to ask her to speak, but I do want to recognize her. We have a descendant tonight of Moses Manuel here. And I believe she's in the back. There she is right there.
Organization for recognizing 150 years of my great grandfather finding the first claim. So thank you very much, and it's really appreciative.
Thank you.
That is kind of cool.
You just never know who's going to show up. Thank you all for coming and being a part of this tonight. If you will indulge me, I only have about 35 minutes of announcements and then we can go. I do want to say the Homestake Opera House is in fact open for business, and we have lots of events and opportunities coming up. On the 18th of April, Jeremiah Harmon will be here in concert. If you don't know who that is, go find out. Because he's really fantastic singer-songwriter, a folksy blues sound that I think really fits this community very well. So I invite you to that. Also want to mention the events that we have coming up that will continue this 150th celebration for Leeds, South Dakota. On July 2nd, we will be having the inaugural and only performance of More Than Gold. This was written by Terry Smith and myself. This is a story, it's Leeds' story, but it's also Leeds' story in song. So we've taken the songs that were written in this community, and there's some amazing music that was written in Leeds for Leeds, including songs like My Melancholy Baby was written here in Leeds. Which is just incredible to think about. And I'm going to invite my daughter up now to sing that for us. So we'll do that later. But that will kick off what we're doing here in July. We'll also be having on July 3rd, we'll start with the other events in town. Rock the Hills at Mountaintop City Concert at Mountaintop. Saturday, July 4th, Gold Camp Jubilee with the largest fireworks show and bands and vendors and kids activities and all kinds of things happening all over town that day. Sunday, July 5th, we have the Lead vs. Deadwood vintage baseball game at Mountaintop. Police will be there. So we should be able to keep the most control over that, I think. America's 250th community picnic at Mountaintop that day. And we'll be celebrating Leeds' 150th anniversary with Nina McIntyre. That will close out our events on Sunday, July 5th. And we want to invite you to submit photos of family and friends and celebrations and the city of Leeds and just everyday moments that she can share during her concert. Really want to invite you to be a part of that. If you do have something you would like to share, growing pot in the Homestake, playing basketball naked, anything like that you'd like to share, you can send that to lead. Okay, Robin, what does this actually say? Lead 15? That makes more sense. Lead 150 Nina at gmail.com. So if you do have something, you can send that to that email, and that will become a part of that celebration. If you need that later, please see me, see Robin, and we can get that address to you as well. So thank you again for coming. We do have a toast this evening. And if you wanted to stay, if you didn't get to be a part of one of the Opera House tours earlier, we will have that immediately following the toast. So do be aware of that. But I want to recognize Jackie Fuller. Jackie has been a driving force in the community of Leeds since 1972, known for her deep passion for local history, for Homestake, and for the Opera House. She has been instrumental in historic preservation initiatives in Leeds, including founding the Leeds Historic Preservation and serving on its board for more than 30 years. Jackie was also Leeds' first female commissioner and first and only female mayor. She is a dedicated volunteer, including here at the Opera House, and a true community advocate. She has long supported Homestake and the entire community of Leeds. Jackie's late husband, Pete, was a long-standing Homestake attorney, and Jackie remains an important part of Leeds' legacy, a vital community member, and we are happy to welcome her to give tonight's celebratory toast. Would you welcome Jackie Fuller? And as she comes forward, because I don't give up the mic very well, if you worked for a Homestake mining company, would you stand up so we can recognize you tonight? I didn't say sit down. If you now work for SURF or have worked for SURF, could we recognize you as well for the work that you're doing in this community?
I was about to say nobody.
And just one more, and then I promise I'll give Jackie the microphone. If you're a family member of someone who's worked at the Homestake Mining Company or for SURF, could you stand up?
You get one on that
Oh,
one.
yep.
I tell you, that's worth popping a cork for. What do you think?
My hips don't have this kind of one.
Oh, that was good.
We'll be replacing the chandelier this year. As we get ready for the toast, you'll notice 4 stations that are around you. Feel free to go to the one closest to you to grab your celebratory glass and begin this celebration. I'll give the microphone to Jackie.
I've been here since 1971. I wanted to live in the hills for years. Any place.
You're waiting.
And those narrow streets,
Can't get
when we
anyone
did
out.
move here, I wanted a house with switches on the wall, like this, and closets. I thought they were really important for a home too. But I thought about all the wonderful things that Homestake did for people. College, scholarships, letting kids work there. So I made a whole list of that. And then I looked at what you're supposed to do with a toast. It's supposed to be brief, heartfelt, and saying something that you truly believe. So my toast would be to all of the many people, past and present, who work for, were associated with, or were somehow touched by the Homestake family. I'm quoting
Looks like I might be able to get
Paul
one for you too.
Emka, who I heard say once in
So it
a
looks like I
very
might be able to
deep
get one for
voice,
you too.
welcome to the Homestake family.
Well, it was a thought.
I raise my glass with you, and that this legacy may continue for another 150 years, mining science.